The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will address the British Chambers of Commerce today as he attempts to woo business chiefs by setting out his vision for reforming planning laws. Sir Keir is expected to say that under his plans, councils need to have the final say on whether homes can be built on green belt land. And I'm very pleased to say the Labour leader joins me now from the QE2 Centre in central London. Sir Keir Starmer, very good morning to you. Before we talk about your planning reform proposals, I'd just like to get your reaction to what Stellantis have said overnight. They effectively want the UK government to renegotiate its Brexit deal.
Well, I do think that we need a better deal than the one that we've got. I do think there are other things that we need to do as well. Supply side chains, etc., need to be improved. So there's a lot of things, but is the Brexit deal we've got working well? No, it isn't, and we need to improve on that. And that's part of our plan to make Brexit work.
So you will actually be looking to renegotiate the Brexit deal with the EU?
Yes, we want a closer trading relationship. I think there's more work we can do with the EU on science and innovation. I also think there's more we can do in the security space as well. So I think there are real improvements to be made to the EU deal. I don't think many people look at that deal and think it's working very well. We were promised an oven-ready deal, and we got something which was frankly half-baked. So there's a lot of work to do there, as there is on everything else, to improve on that, clear up the mess, and then power our economy forward, because if there's one thing that has been significantly bad over the last 13 years or so, it's our growth rate. Our economy hasn't grown at the rate that we need it to grow, and that's why I've said that an incoming Labour government, if we're privileged enough to be voted in, will have as a central mission economic growth, highest sustained growth in the G7, and that needs to be felt in living standards rising across the whole of the country.
Now, the UK's trade performance has deteriorated pretty badly since Brexit. Would you be open to going as far as rejoining the EU single market?
No, I don't think we should rejoin either the EU generally or the single market. But I do think that we should break down barriers. If you look at, car manufacturing is obviously in the news today. We've been a very good car manufacturer for many, many years. We've been good because the way that we've put manufacturing together has been all of the parts that are needed for the car coming in as seamlessly as possible, arriving at the assembly point at just the right time so that cars can then be built, turned around and out of the warehouse as quickly as possible. That's a model of manufacturing that has worked. It has been impeded by the EU deal that we've got, and that's why we need to improve on the deal. I do think we can do other things as well, though. I mean, some of those parts I think we should be making in the UK, so we're not constantly bringing them in over borders. So all of this has to ladder up to a very strong, comprehensive plan to grow the economy.
Well, let's talk about what you're looking to do with the planning regime. As I understand it, you are essentially looking to loosen planning regulations.
Yes, we want to build more houses. As you will know, many people watching this will know, the aspiration, the dream of owning your own home is very real. Not least because for working people it provides security that they desperately need. And that has been killed effectively by the government, because whereas we had targets for house building until the tail end of last year, those targets have been taken down. That means now the blockers are in charge, and house building will drop probably to its lowest level since the Second World War. So what I want to set out today is what an incoming Labour government, again, if we're privileged enough to be elected in, will do about that. Partly that's about putting those targets back up, but that on its own I don't think will do enough. We need to get to grips with the planning framework, because at the moment it's those that own the land and developers who essentially choose how many houses and where they're going to be. I think we're going to drive house building at pace. We need to put local areas in charge of that, so change the planning rules, have development corporations as vehicles on the ground to drive building, and make sure that the dream, the aspiration of owning your own home is realised for so many people who at the moment have had their dreams shattered. And I know when I was growing up, my dad was a tool maker working in a factory. My mum was a nurse. We didn't have a lot of money, and sometimes we struggled with our bills, but we did have our own house with a mortgage. And that sense of security. So I never feared as a child that we wouldn't have a roof over our head, our own roof over our head. And that's the sort of security that goes alongside that aspiration to own your own home.
Now, you've said in the recent past you want to give communities more say over developments in their area. What if these communities don't want to have their local green belt concreted over?
Well, on the basic principle that local areas should have a greater say, I think that's really important because at the moment, as I say, landowners and developers tend to choose where houses are put. And that often leads to a conflict with local communities. Whereas if local authorities, local areas had more of a say, I think it would actually reduce those local conflicts. You asked me about the green belt. Of course we want to protect our countryside. When we went on holiday when I was a child, we went to the Lake District. I know the countryside is rich is to be protected, but we are going to have to make tough choices. And there are parts of the green belt where we build now, and I think there are better choices to be made. And the example I'd give, just to bring my argument alive, if you like, is that there's been a housing development in the southeast of England where the choice for the housing development was a playing field or a car park. The car park was technically in the green belt and so protected. And so the playing field, which was technically outside the green belt, was chosen for the building. So we've ended up with a car park being protected and the playing field being used to build houses. I just think that we've got to make different choices. So this is not about disrespecting the need to protect the green belt and the countryside. Of course we've got to do that, but we've got to make tough choices about, and if you let local areas decide, I'm pretty sure they would say, look, if we had the choice, we'd have put those houses up on the car park and saved the playing field. That's common sense, and it will drive house building, and that is also part of our plan for rebuilding the economy, because for every 100,000 houses that we can build across the United Kingdom, then broadly speaking, that's 1% of GDP that goes up. That's desperately, desperately needed just at the moment.
You're also talking about ending the moratorium on onshore wind farms in England. What sort of veto will communities have if they don't want these things on their doorstep?
Well, communities have to have a say, but at the moment, the system is tilted so that if only a few people object, it takes years to get anything done. And what we're saying about planning on housing applies, frankly, equally to other business sectors, whether it's wind farms, the laboratories we desperately need, the warehouses we need. All of the planning is taking far, far too long. I asked one of the energy CEOs, if we were in government, how long would it take you to build a wind farm? And he said to me, about 2 years. I said, well, why then does it take 13 years or so now before anything actually happens? And he said, well, it's 2 years to build, it's about 5 years for the planning, and then the grid, which needs to connect to the wind farm, doesn't really crawl towards the wind farm until the wind farm is finished, and you end up with 13 years. That's far too long, and businesses across the country express their frustrations time and again that the whole thing takes too long. And that holds us back because other countries are much more streamlined. They've changed their rules and they're winning the race for the next generation of jobs. We have to take the tough decisions to turn that around so that, when the question is asked, which nation is going to lead on wind turbines, which nation is going to lead on hydrogen, the answer is why not Britain?
Now, staying with energy, the Unite Union, which is your biggest financial backer, has called today for the renationalisation of the entire UK energy industry. Is that something you're going to consider?
Well, we have considered it and decided that it isn't the right step. And I'll tell you for why. We looked at it the summer before last when energy prices, as you know, went through the roof. And there was this question, well, wouldn't it be better then to bring them into some sort of public ownership? And I looked at it with my team and I said, well, how much would it cost us to do it? And then the crucial question, if we did it, would that reduce the prices, which is obviously the thing that's pressing on people at the moment? And the answer to that is no, because even if you nationalised, brought it into public ownership, energy companies still have to buy on the global market. And that's why we did consider it and in the end rejected it as not actually answering the central question, which is how do you drive down those energy prices? And I think there are better things that we can do.
Did it in France, and it did bring down energy prices.
Well, I think it depends on the configuration as to whether it's linked to the producers of the oil and gas or renewables in the first place. But the other things I think we can do is we can rush towards renewables. We do believe that there should be a publicly owned vehicle for that, so that as we go towards renewables, we want GB Energy, a publicly owned company, to be the vehicle for ensuring that the proceeds of that come back to the British taxpayer and are used, to help bring those bills down. So I'm not, ideologically opposed to something that's in public hands. In fact, we're proposing GB Energy, but that's to yield the future work that we want to do. There are other things, by the way. I'm very, very keen on the idea that we properly insulate our homes. If we'd been doing that for the last 5, 6, 7 years, then millions of homes would have very cheap bills. I've seen this, you've probably seen it yourself, in places like Yorkshire, where you go to one of the homes that's been stripped out, insulated properly, and I went there, the people living there were beaming from ear to ear on a freezing February morning because their house was warm, their bills were very, very low, and that ought to be not just what we expect of new houses, but what we expect to be retrofitted to existing houses, because in the long run, what we do with energy bills, we need to keep them down. There's been price freezes in place. They're very expensive things to do, but we've got to fix the fundamentals, if you like, at the same time.
Okay. Before I let you go, you've obviously been on a great mission to rekindle relationships with businesses. Every CEO I know has met either you or Rachel Reeves over the last year or so. Can you carry your party with you on that? Because you've even been talking to private equity executives, which are, for a lot of your party, a sort of folk devil almost.
Yeah, we've spoken to no end of CEOs, and I've changed my party, and my party now is fully signed up to this. We know that to grow the economy, we have to partner with business. And when I say we're pro-business, what I mean by that is that we recognise that business is a force for good, that the next generation of jobs, secure jobs, and output for this country is with a active, dynamic government, if you like, sleeves rolled up, working alongside businesses. And that's why the discussions we've had with CEOs has not been just a cup of coffee, get to know you. It's also been about how do we work together in government? And that's why Rachel and I have met so many CEOs. We went to Davos, as you may have seen, to speak directly to investors and to ask, what's the inhibitor? Why aren't you investing in the UK in the way that we think you should? And a large part of their answer was because we haven't got the stability, we haven't got the partnership that we need from the government at the moment, and I'm determined that we'll turn that around. And just as I've turned around my party, we want to turn around the country so that we can drive forward to what I'm absolutely convinced will be a better future.
OK, so Keir Starmer, appreciate you joining me today. Thank you. Just going to break away from the business news very momentarily. You might have seen the QR code on the side of your screen. The Home Affairs Committee is right now examining the Metropolitan Police's approach to the coronation and the handling of the protests over the coronation weekend. We're just going to very briefly listen in.
Because if you view protest as inherently problematic and inconvenient, rather than as a necessary and important element of a free society, balance will almost always fall on the side of maintaining order and preventing crime, whereas the starting position should always be that peaceful protests should not be restricted and should be facilitated so far as possible.
And I agree with that, and the evidence, I believe, would show that that's what we do. Getting the balance right between the qualified rights of protesters and the impact is difficult, and protest is by its nature designed to get attention. We understand that. But I'm very clear that there is a strong presumption in favour of the right to protest, and that's important in a democratic society. But where that strays into crime, then obviously the police will deal with the laws as we find them. But this is something we are very familiar with, and we understand the sort of human rights position.
Constable Noble, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, just a couple of points.
Well, there you go. If you want to continue following the Home Affairs Select Committee, you can do so by scanning the QR code, which is going to pop up on your screen any second now. There it is. Now, the global chemicals group INEOS is warning that the government's 75% windfall tax on oil and gas producers in the North Sea will lead to a collapse in investment in the basin. INEOS owns the Forties pipeline system, the largest pipeline in the North Sea, which annually transports just under a third of the UK's total oil production to the mainland. It's linked to more than 85 fields in the North Sea, giving INEOS a unique insight into the investment plans of oil and gas producers. It says that investment is now going elsewhere. I've been speaking with Brian Gilvary. He's the chairman of INEOS Energy.
I think what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, we've come out of COVID. So if you remember, we went into the COVID period. It was really hard in terms of trying to maintain jobs through that period. We came out, we saw a bit of a bounce on demand, particularly out of China. Capital was starting to be back invested in the North Sea. And then I think what we're now beginning to see over the next year, 2 years, people trying to maintain the positions they have, but we're not seeing major new investment going in from the big independents. And that, the independents are the big lifeblood of the North Sea, and we're simply not seeing that at the moment.
But you're not necessarily seeing investment draining away either.
Oh, I think now what the situation is, if you look at the windfall tax that was introduced in the United Kingdom, which came along for reasons to alleviate the cost of energy and these super high profits we were seeing being published by the big integrated companies. A lot of those profits actually came from trading, and necessarily those trading profits don't all sit within the UK regime. So I think the idea of an introduction of a windfall tax made sense at the time to alleviate the cost of energy for domestic users, which seemed totally reasonable. But that windfall tax has now it's been increased by a further 10%, so it's now at 75% compared to the 40% where we were. Oil prices were $120 a barrel back then, now they're 60% lower. So if you look at where the oil price is today, we're 60% off those highs. And yet we still have this windfall tax of 75%. So it's very simple economics, Ian. If I have a pound, do I put a pound into the United Kingdom economy, or do I translate that to a dollar and put it into the United States, where the tax rate is around 37 to 40% for the offshore production, compared to 75% in the United Kingdom. And in the United States, you've also got the Inflation Reduction Act, which is encouraging big green energy investments. So you've now got this ability to invest in the United States at a stable fiscal regime, and this has always been the issue with the United Kingdom and the North Sea, is that with the stability of the fiscal regime is a major problem. But also you can start to think about things like carbon capture around the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think right now the UK is not a particularly attractive place to invest from an energy perspective in terms of oil and gas in the North Sea.
The government would say, well, hang on, we're offering tax reliefs for investment in the North Sea that can be as much as 91%.
Which I think is right. So they introduced that as a sort of catch-all to try and alleviate the impact, but there are very few companies spending the levels of capital, and it's really the big integrated majors that are spending that level of capital that will alleviate those taxes. So effectively what that means is the independents in the North Sea are left then to effectively carry that tax burden, because of course if you've got those big tax 91% incentives and your trading profits are outside the ring fence, effectively, I think those big integrated companies will be paying de minimis low levels of tax compared to what was envisaged around the windfall tax.
Which is why, presumably, the likes of Shell and BP are still investing in the North Sea basin.
You'd have to ask them that question.
Right. What about Norway, though? I mean, Norway's tax rate is even higher than the UK's.
It is, and it's about 78%, so it's a very high number. It's one of the reasons why we exited as INEOS, our position in Norway, and we took that capital and invested it into Denmark, where again we have a more stable tax regime. So it's a choice for governments as to how much tax take they wish to take, but there are consequences for those choices. And I fear a little bit coming into this winter, as we saw last year, 60% of European gas, or rather gas storage in Europe and the United Kingdom, 60% of that gas came from Russia. That gas won't be available this winter. And it is very possible that we'll come into this winter and find ourselves with curtailed investment in our own generation of oil and gas in the United Kingdom, that we're forced to import gas again to deal with a cold winter, which is possible this year. And that gas last year was being imported at 10 times the cost of the gas in the United States, which is extraordinary. You could buy Henry Hub gas at $7 an MMBTU in the United States and import it into Europe or the United Kingdom at $70 an MMBTU. It's a 10-to-1 ratio. And so therefore, I think what we should be focused on in terms of the United Kingdom is continuing to encourage investment in our own energy and infrastructure that we're going to need for multi-decades ahead, even as we think about the energy transition. And the UK government itself has said how important oil and gas will be out in 2050 in terms of balancing the needs from a power perspective.
Isn't the security of supply argument slightly diminished, though, by the fact that a lot of North Sea output is actually exported?
No, today actually a lot of that gas comes onshore. If you looked at last year, we had to import, if you look at the levels of LNG in last winter, when we suddenly, because the issue is a lot of our gas comes in from Europe, we import from Europe via the interconnectors. As Europe started to back off and hold its storage, we started to see more LNG. Now, what the United Kingdom did really well over a decade ago was to build a big infrastructure of LNG import terminals to enable us to bring gas in. But that gas comes in at a very, very high premium. And the issue that we have fundamentally in the UK is we have nothing like the amount of gas storage in the UK compared to Europe. It's relatively de minimis. Things like Rough, which was an important part of infrastructure that we still are talking about whether Rough comes back into play, are really important bits of critical infrastructure, as is Forties pipeline that INEOS runs. And of course, we have to invest in that pipeline to ensure that the oil and gas is available to us into the future. And therefore, we need to make sure that companies are continuing to invest in the future of the North Sea to enable that key piece of infrastructure to continue to operate.
I think you're about a third of the way through the major investment projects that you've planned for Forties. Is that in danger? Might this project never be seen through to completion?
I think it will be in danger if we don't see investment in the North Sea infrastructure that will generate the more oil and gas that we're going to need to see flow through that pipeline and flow into the United Kingdom. And it seems baffling to me that we would have an integrated energy strategy that relies on imports from the United States or Qatar or other locations around the world, rather than relying on our own key infrastructure that we have available to us at much, much lower cost.
Now, the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has said he wants to see what he calls proper windfall taxes. He doesn't think that the industry is paying enough as it is.
I think rhetoric when you are out of power, when you come into power, you then start to have to look at the policies associated with those. And in other jurisdictions around the world, as governments have talked about what they would or wouldn't do when they come into administration. The Biden administration is a great example of the things that he talked about what he would do when he was out of power. When he came into power, actually, it was a very different story in terms of what happened the onshore. I can't comment on what a potential future leader of this country should or shouldn't do. What I would say, though, is if you don't invest and encourage investment in your own infrastructure, you'll pay a much higher price if you have to import that energy.
Still to come on Ian King Live. We're going to show you how the markets are doing this Wednesday morning. Stay with us.
The road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Well, news that Japan has emerged from recession during the first 3 months of the year meant that, yet again, the Nikkei in Tokyo was the star performer among equity markets in the Asia-Pacific region overnight. The index closed above 30,000 for the first time since September 2021. Well, in Europe, stocks have been trading largely to the downside this morning. Here's the current picture. It's a busy day for company results. You can see the DAX there is the only main continental European index up today, and that's because its two biggest constituents are both trading higher. The engineering giant Siemens is ahead by 2.5% in Frankfurt as it raised its full-year sales and profits guidance, while the software group SAP, which is Germany's largest company, is ahead by 1.5% as its results were also well received. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is just about in positive territory. It's more or less unchanged right now. Mixed trading this morning. The London Stock Exchange itself is the biggest faller on the FTSE 100 this morning. The shares are down by some 5% after private equity firm Blackstone sold down its stake. Meanwhile, the credit rating group Experian, it's off by just under 4% after its annual growth prospects forecast came in shy of expectations. Among the FTSE gainers this morning, well, Sage is leading the way, up 4% on its results. I'll be speaking to the CEO shortly. Outside the FTSE, Morgan Advanced Materials is ahead by nearly 1% after getting a push from one of the brokers. Well, on the downside, the industrial threads provider Coates Group is off by just over 4.5% as its results fell short of expectations. On the foreign exchange markets, well, there's been a bit of buying of the US dollar this morning, a bit of safe haven buying there. In fact, sterling off nearly 0.5% against the greenback. The pound also down by 0.1% nearly against the euro. The single currency, meanwhile, is off by 1/3% right now against the dollar. As for the oil price, well, that is weaker this morning after an unexpected rise in US crude inventories overnight. A barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $74.78 a barrel. That's off 1/6%. Well, joining me this morning is the head of investment at Interactive Investor, Victoria Scholar. Victoria, good to see you. A really busy day for company news. British Land, not terribly encouraging.
No, this is a stock that's down about 10% year to date and about 30% over the last year. And it said that it had declining property valuations. You know, it's heavily exposed to retail and campuses as well. We know there's the demise of the high street, but more broadly, commercial real estate has been struggling with that shift towards more working from home. But it did say that the yield environment has been improving. You know, we're heading towards the potential peak of the rate hiking cycle. And it's interesting if you compare British Land to some of the house builders like Persimmon, because they've been reflecting this potential interest rate peak a lot better. We've seen these stocks fare much better in recent weeks, whereas British Land is still struggling a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. We had Land Securities on the programme yesterday, and they were making the point, that there's sentiment in the sector is awful. There's not a lot of investment going on, and yet they're still seeing good rental growth, decent occupancy levels. So it's a really kind of mixed market.
Yeah, I think it really is. You know, on the one hand, in the sort of the retail side, we are seeing those rents pretty high, but in terms of underlying valuations, they have been struggling. So, like you say, it's a bit of a mixed picture.
Another company that's caught your eye this morning that's also reporting today, Mitchells & Butlers, the pub operator.
Yes, so it reported its half-year earnings and it saw adjusted earnings of £100 million, so falling from £120 million last year. But it did see sales growth and it had some strong sales over the Easter bank holiday weekend. But this is a stock that was heavily punished last year with those losses accelerating around the time of the mini-budget. So we have seen the stock start to regain strength off those October lows. So price action has been quite positive. But of course, it's still grappling with a lot of those inflationary pressures around wages and around energy and around food and drinks prices too.
It is interesting, though. There's a lot of positive sentiment in the sector right now. I mean, J.D. Witherspoon's numbers recently were very, very good. Marston's yesterday seemed quite chirpy. We had Green King on the other day, Nick McKenzie, the CEO. They're all fairly upbeat right now.
Yeah, well, I think beer is actually a pretty resilient part of the market. And we've also seen that people are still trying to enjoy those little luxuries while they can amid the cost of living crisis and that pressure on the consumers. So while they might not be out there buying new cars or buying electricals, they are potentially still going to the pub and having some sort of enjoyment there.
Yeah, we can all drink to that. Victoria, good to see you this morning. Thank you. Still to come here on Ian King Live. I've been catching up with the chief executive of JD Sports. The company says it's going to see annual profits this year of £1 billion for the first time. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, last week saw the Competition and Markets Authority give unconditional clearance to the takeover of Inmarsat, the global mobile satellite communications provider, by the US company Viasat. It means that today's earnings update from Inmarsat, a supplier to airline shipping groups and governments around the world, is likely to be its last as a separate business. Well, today, the company reported underlying earnings of $259 million for the first 3 months of the year. That was up 32% on the same period last year. Well, joining me now is Inmarsat's chief executive, Rajiv Suri. Rajiv, good to see you again. Aviation really shot the lights out for you this quarter, up 32%. Is that as good as it gets?
It was phenomenal, actually. Good morning, Ian. Thanks for having me. The in-flight connectivity services, i.e. Wi-Fi to commercial airlines, that grew 75% year on year. Overall, the aviation business was up 36%. The other two segments also grew just short of 30%. The thing here is that we've got strong order backlog, meaning that we've got orders and we have to connect user terminals onto aircraft. So this bodes well for the long term for our aviation business. So very pleased with the results and the continued momentum there.
Now, your maritime business clearly suffered during COVID. It feels now as though it's back to sustainable growth again. Would that be the case?
It's definitely back to sustainable growth. The business has now grown 6% this quarter. It's the 9th consecutive quarter of growth. Again, here we've got strong order backlogs. So the vessels that we're connecting with our high-speed broadband is, it's 14% up. So that again bodes well for the future. And I think pleasingly, the new high-speed broadband business is now greater than the legacy business. So it's 60-40, and that 60% is growing fast. So it is definitely on a sustainable growth trajectory.
Now, the US government in particular seems to be spending increasing sums with you. I think something like $2.5 billion worth of new contracts last year alone. Is the mix of services and solutions it's buying from you changing greatly?
More managed services, more customized solutions, but so meaning more airtime, more managed services that we use our commercial satellite offerings to tailor them for government and military applications. We have very strong underpin of contracts in the US government, but increasingly we're also getting strong underpin of long-term contracts in the non-US government business. In fact, our non-US government business grew 26% year on year this quarter, and this is now the third year of record results for our, the non-US government business.
Now, since we last spoke, you've joined something called the Space Safety Coalition. What is that?
It's very much about, Inmarsat started with saving lives at sea. We're saving lives in the air. We save about 6 lives every day at sea. We're big believers in certainty and safety and connectivity where it matters all of the time. But we're also big believers in solving the issue of space sustainability. We had 2,500 satellites in 2019, up in space. We now have 7,000 satellites at the end of last year. We're projecting as an industry this will get to 100,000 or more satellites. So imagine 100,000 or more satellites, most of them in the low Earth orbit. So that really means there's collision risk. There's light pollution risk. There's risk to astronomical discoveries. There's black carbon being deposited in the Earth's upper atmosphere with all the burning of alumina that takes place up there. So we're very worried about space sustainability. We're asking for a code of conduct for the industry and also regulation that helps solve this problem, because we don't want space debris with about 1 million objects up there flying at 10 kilometers per second, which is 6 times the speed of a bullet. All it takes is a speck of paint to collide with a satellite, creating a potential series of collisions. So I think both safety and space sustainability is very close to our heart.
OK, Rajiv, there's loads more I wanted to ask you, but we're really tight on time today. Do appreciate you joining me today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Now, JD Sports said this morning it expects its annual profits to top £1 billion for the first time this year. The sports fashion retailer made the prediction as it reported a pre-tax profit before adjustments of £991.4 million for the year to the 29th of January. That was up 4.5% on the same period 12 years earlier. It partly reflected the impact of new store openings, mainly in the United States, but also in European markets such as Hungary, Lithuania and Greece. I've been speaking with JD's chief executive, Regis Scholz.
Yeah, I think we are delivering fantastic results this year. I think that we reached a 10 billion mark, which is a key mark for us. We almost reached 1 billion. We just stopped just below to have something to celebrate next year. So we are growing. Our number one market now is US. We are very balanced between the different geography, with 30% of our sales in North America, 30% in Europe, 30% in UK, 10% in Asia Pacific. We are gaining share everywhere we operate. So, it has been a fantastic time, and I think that it's a great business. We have invented something which is unique, which is at the middle between fashion and sport. And all our products are sport inspired, but are wear every day. They are not designed to do sport. They are designed to be an everyday. And I think if I can give an image, is a sneaker. You go to in the street and 80% of the shoes are sneaker, and 10 years ago this would have been 80% formal shoes, and that is driving our growth. And I think we have fantastic people. I think that we should always say that it's the experience in our stores, the energy, and the service that you get is unique, and that is the idea.
The United States has traditionally been a bit of a graveyard for UK retailers, most notably Tesco, before that Marks and Spencer. What do you think you're getting right over there that some of the other UK companies that have tried and failed over there didn't?
First, we moved to the US by acquisition, so which has not been the case for Tesco or for M&S. So we have 1,000 stores in the US. So, and it's very local business. So we acquire business, which are entrepreneurial business. We keep the entrepreneur and they continue to do what they do well. So that's the first thing. At the same moment, we use this base and strong base to develop JD. And I think that's what makes us successful. We have not come and to say, this is it, you need to, we just come, buy business, we take the team and we say, you know what, we have this proposition, how you think it can work in the US? And so they have taken it, they embrace it, and they have developed it. And that's what makes us unique. And you know, we have 150 stores in the US, so it is working. So it's not like, you know, unproven. We just now delivering the proposition, but we have tested enough. We have an economic model that works. We have a love index, which is the highest. We have a higher love rate than our key competitor in the US market. So I think that it's a great story.
You're targeting, I think, 1,750 new stores within the next 3 years. Are you trying to do much too quickly?
No, we're just responding to the customer. You know, our customer is asking for having more stores. So we're just following our customer. You know, there is only 3 countries in the world where we have a double-digit market share: UK, Ireland, Australia. And in US or in Europe, we are around 5% market share. So we are big enough in order to say we have something that can be leveraged. At the same moment, we are not responding to the customer need at all. So, you know, our love index is the same across the world, but we have much more reach to the consumer in UK than we have in the rest. So, you know, it's great, and I think you have seen that, you know, in retail it's go fast. You know, you see Lululemon, they are opening this type of number of stores every year, and no problem at all. So I think that we are in the same case. We are the love brand. We are the trendy one. We are creating something new, and customers love us, and they want more from us.
You've said today that you raised prices by between 5% and 10% over the year just finished. What sort of price increases are you anticipating this year?
I think we should be back to a normal inflation, which is 2 to 3%. That's what we are looking at. You know, the key factor of why price has been increased has been energy and transportation. Energy are back to normal, I will say, and transportation costs are really back to normal. So I think that will come back to a normal inflation. And you know, I will always say that, you know, the most important things for us is unemployment, and is the fact that the young people can find a job. You know, it's great to see that, you know, 3 years ago it was impossible to find a job. Now today we are all fighting to get the young adult in our business, and I think it's a great situation, and I think we should celebrate more the low unemployment and look at the nice things that is happening compared to inflation. Yes, inflation has been high and too high, but it has been more dictated by short-term unbalance of the offer and the demand, and that is starting to come back.
But you put your finger on a key point there, which is that consumer spending has been under a great deal of pressure, certainly here in the UK. You don't appear to be suffering from that.
Because the young adult doesn't have a mortgage, doesn't pay the energy bill, the parents are paying, and they get a job, you know. And you know, yes, my pair of trainer cost perhaps £5 more than it was costing last year, but last year they didn't, or 2 years ago they didn't have a job. Now they have a job, so the difference is much higher than the £5 that they have to spend more for the Air Force and the Gazelle.
Now, if you own or run a small business here in the UK, there's roughly an even money chance that you'll be a customer of Sage. The Newcastle-based company's accounting, human resources and payroll software is used by more than 3 million customers worldwide, including nearly half of the UK's SMEs. Well, today, Sage announced underlying operating profits of £227 million for the 6 months to the end of March. That was up 14% on the same period a year ago. Joining me now is the Chief Executive, Steve Hare. Steve, good to see you this morning. A lot of SMEs are finding life quite tough at the moment due to higher interest rates. That doesn't appear to be hitting your renewal rates.
Yeah, morning, Ian. I think, generally small, mid-sized businesses, obviously they've got some headwinds, they've got some increased costs, but they're also, on average, we've just done a survey, over 80% of the 12,000 SMEs that we surveyed are feeling positive about the future, and over half of them are looking to invest more in technology. So what they're doing is looking at how can they run their own businesses more effectively, more efficiently, and part of how they do that is by investing in more technology.
To what extent have you put up prices during the last 6 months?
Yeah, what we've done is we've put up prices sort of between about 4 or 5%. So we've sort of sought to compensate for the salary increases. We've given our own people, about 60-70% of our costs is people related. So we've tried to sort of focus on a fair value exchange for our customers, and certainly not put up prices in line with inflation.
People know you best for your accounting software, but what does that account for of the overall sales mix these days?
Yeah, well, we tend to bundle things together now. So we sell people both accounting, payroll, HR, but the sort of core financials is still at the heart of what we do. So it's well over half of our revenue still comes from those core financial systems, whether you're a small business or a mid-sized business. It's at the heart of what we do.
Now, generative AI is obviously the hot topic of the moment. To what extent are you trying to incorporate that into what you do?
Yeah, we've always had AI over the last few years, always had AI embedded into our products. But you're right, this next phase of generative AI it's very exciting. It offers a number of possibilities for small, mid-sized businesses in terms of aiding their own productivity. We have a major partner summit next week in the US, and we're going to be announcing some of the first products which incorporate that generative AI technology. So we see this as a very positive thing for our customers.
Now, you mentioned the US. 40% of your sales now come from the US, compared with just 25% here from the UK. Would moving your main listing to New York make any sense for you?
Well, I think, as you know, we're very proud of the fact that we were born here in the UK, born in the Northeast in Newcastle. And, we've not seen any constraints to our growth as we seek to access capital, as we, seek to expand our business. We're very proud to be listed here in the UK.
Now, well, that's music to the ears of a lot of people in the Northeast in particular, I suspect. Steve, good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come here on Ian King Live, I'm going to be speaking to the Chief Investment Officer at GXO Logistics about the changing trends in supply chains. Don't go away.
There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of Northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. Now, during this inflationary environment, companies are working harder than ever to keep their costs down, particularly when they're selling direct to customers. Well, that's particularly the case in terms of distribution costs, which in turn means that logistics companies are fighting to reduce their own costs through initiatives such as automation. Well, GXO Logistics is one of the world's biggest managers of outsourced supply chains and warehousing, with customers including Sainsbury's, Majestic Wine and Ted Baker. Well, joining me now is its Chief Investment Officer, Mark Manduka. Mark, good to see you this morning.
Thank you.
How does automation in the UK and Europe compare with what you're doing in the US?
It's actually very similar. We're seeing a huge investment in automation. And as you said, this is a drive towards productivity for a number of our global blue chip customers. So we're across 27 countries. We run about 1,000 warehouses, and we do it for 1,200 global blue chip customers. And what we're trying to do is make customers the best version of themselves in the warehouse, efficient, fast in the warehouse, and also accurate, and automation achieves those goals.
Now, obviously, during the pandemic, the just-in-time model for distribution was tested almost to destruction. Is that being replaced now by a sort of just-in-case type attitude?
It was. You saw that in Q2 last year. There was that shift from just-in-time to just-in-case. And what we saw was a changing of the guard. Historically, what's happened in the last 30 years is there's been this outshoring to Asia, and everything being manufactured and to some degree also warehoused there. The change that's taking place now is that you're seeing a lot of that come back onshore, nearshored, and people want their inventory closer to their end consumer. And we're part of that journey. As people move away from China and come back to both the UK and the US, we're going to help them warehouse and become more automated in the process.
That sounds like you're going to be needing more land in this country and elsewhere.
There's going to be a lot of growth, I think, from a warehousing standpoint. There's very strong demand, particularly as you go out of London towards the M1. What you're looking for is warehousing that's close to major conurbations. So when the order comes through, say, for example, with e-commerce, you're looking to make sure that you're close to that end customer so that you can deliver as efficiently as possible. But we operate within the warehouse.
Now, you've just signed a big contract with Sainsbury's. I think it's your biggest contract ever, in fact. What sort of things are you going to be doing with them?
It's very exciting. So we have a $2.3 billion pipeline. So we're signing with a lot of global blue chip customers. What we're looking to do with every customer is make sure that their inventory is right-sized for purpose. A lot of companies come to us and they aren't very automated in their own sense. So what we're looking to do is automate them from an inventory standpoint. We're then looking to see what we can do in terms of the variable cost within the warehouse to make them the most efficient version of themselves. And what inevitably happens when you automate a warehouse is you see the revenue throughput go up, and in some cases you see the accuracy of orders go from roughly 95% on an unautomated warehouse to roughly 99.9% on an automated one. So big changes for customers.
How big is the addressable market? I mean, are there plenty of people out there that haven't outsourced what they do on this front?
$500 billion total addressable market across North America and Europe. So there's a huge landmass to play with. For a company like mine that's roughly doing 10 billion of revenue, huge opportunity to take a lot of market share, I think, over the next 10 years. And we're very much at the nexus of automation, e-commerce, outsourcing, and also the nearshoring theme that you mentioned.
Now, this time last year, you were in the process of wrapping up the takeover of Clipper Logistics, £965 million deal. How has the integration gone?
It's a fantastic business. So they run a lot of multi-tenanted warehouses, particularly in the UK market, where they had a very dominant force, particularly with those multi-tenanted customers. They were running the best global blue chip brands, so we're very pleased to have them on board. We've been enacting our cost synergy program with them. That's been going extremely well. But more importantly, we're excited about the revenue synergies that we can grow. Multi-tenanted customers going to dedicated customers. That's the muscle that we're going to flex in that business. It's an exciting time.
And briefly, Mark, you worked here in the city as an analyst for 10 years. What made you want to go into business?
So I think the reality is that every sell-side analyst has their time. I loved what I was doing. I was covering the transportation space, and I was covering a lot of logistics companies. To roll my sleeves up and get my hands dirty on a business that's so exciting and has so much growth, as you say, from a total addressable market standpoint, is a big change, and it's a great outlook for me.
All right. Hope to see you again in future, Mark.
Thanks
for joining me today. That's it from me for today. There's much more on the Sky News mobile app and on the website with reporting, video content and analysis from our business team. Well, I'm back at tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Hope very much to see you then. In the meantime, do stay tuned because up after this short break, it's Kimberly Leonard with all the build-up to Prime Minister's questions and, of course, the latest from that Home Affairs Select Committee meeting into the policing of the King's coronation. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining me today. Cheerio.